What happens when one of Hollywood's most unpredictable comedy legends sits down with one of daytime television's sharpest voices? And a simple question about his career turns into an explosive battle that nobody saw coming. This is the moment Chevy Chase walked off the View. And what he said before storming out will leave you speechless. Before we get into this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think about what went down here, because this situation is absolutely wild. The studio audience was buzzing with excitement as Chevy Chase walked onto the set. The veteran comedian, known for his work on Saturday Night Live and films like Caddyshack and National Lampoon's Vacation, settled into his seat at the table. The panel consisted of Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah N., Sunny Hostin, Alyssa Farah Griffin, and of course Joy Behar. The mood seemed light at first, with Whoopi handling the introductions and the audience applauding warmly. Whoopi started things off with a softball question about his new memoir that had just been released. Chevy smiled and launched into a story about his early days in comedy, talking about the absurdity of his rise to fame. The audience laughed, the hosts nodded along, and everything seemed perfectly pleasant. Sarah asked him about working with some of his famous co-stars, and he delivered a few amusing anecdotes that had everyone smiling. Then Joy leaned forward. "So Chevy, I have to ask, you've had a reputation over the years for being, let's say, difficult to work with. Do you think that reputation is fair, or is it something the media has blown out of proportion?" The audience went quiet. Chevy's smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. "Well, Joy, I think that's an interesting way to start a conversation. Do you often invite people on just to insult them, or is this a special occasion?" Joy laughed, but there was an edge to it. "I'm not insulting you. I'm asking about something that's been reported by multiple sources over decades. Bill Murray has talked about fighting with you on set. Community creator Dan Harmon spoke about issues during your time on that show. These aren't things I'm making up." "You're right. You're not making them up," Chevy said, his tone cooling. "But you are choosing to focus on them within the first 5 minutes of this interview. I've been in this business for 50 years. I've made people laugh for 50 years. And you want to talk about gossip and rumors from disgruntled people who couldn't take a joke." Whoopi tried to interject. "I think what Joy is getting at is that your book touches on some of these relationships, and she's curious about your perspective." "Now looking back, my perspective is that comedy is not a safe space," Chevy said, turning to Whoopi, but clearly still heated. "When I was on SNL, we pushed boundaries. We said things that made people uncomfortable. That was the entire point. Now everyone wants to dissect every interaction through this modern lens of, did everyone feel good? Was everyone nice? Did we all hold hands and sing together afterwards? That's not comedy. That's therapy." Joy jumped back in. "There's a difference between pushing boundaries in comedy and being unkind to the people you work with. You can be funny without being cruel. Plenty of comedians manage to do it." "Oh, really?" Chevy leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "And who are these perfect comedians you're referring to? Because I'd love to meet them. Every comedian I know, the good ones anyway, the ones who actually made people laugh until they couldn't breathe. Every single one of them has been called difficult or mean or problematic or whatever the word of the day is. George Carlin was called offensive. Richard Pryor was called dangerous. Joan Rivers was called vicious. But they were geniuses. Joan Rivers is actually a perfect example," Joyce said, her voice rising slightly. "She was sharp. She was cutting. But the people who worked with her consistently said she was professional and kind behind the scenes. You can be edgy in your work without treating people around you poorly. That's the distinction I'm making." "You didn't know Joan?" Chevy said flatly. "I did. And trust me, she could be just as difficult as anyone else when the situation called for it. The difference is people choose who they want to canonize and who they want to tear down. And right now, I'm apparently in the tear down category." Sunny host spoke up for the first time. "Chevy, I don't think anyone is trying to tear you down. But you have to admit that when multiple people over multiple decades say similar things, there might be something worth examining there. That's not gossip. That's a pattern." "A pattern," Chevy repeated, shaking his head. "Let me tell you about patterns. The pattern I see is that anyone who refuses to apologize for who they are, anyone who doesn't get on their knees and beg forgiveness for not being perfect, gets destroyed. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to sit here and flagellate myself for your entertainment." "Nobody's asking you to flagellate yourself," Joy said. "We're asking you to take some accountability. Do you think you've ever treated anyone poorly on a set? Simple question. Do Do you think you've ever treated anyone poorly at this table? Chevy shot back. Because I could probably find some people who'd say yes to that, too. Should we spend the rest of this segment talking about every time you've been sharp with a guest or dismissive of someone's opinion? Or is this standard only applied to me? The audience gasped audibly. Joy's face flushed. That's completely different, and you know it. I'm a talk show host having conversations. You're talking about allegedly creating hostile work environments. Allegedly, Chevy said. That's a fun word. Real courageous of you to bring up allegations. Why don't we talk about the work? Why don't we talk about the fact that Caddyshack is still considered one of the greatest comedies ever made? Why don't we talk about the vacation movies that people still watch with their families every holiday season? Why don't we talk about the fact that I helped build Saturday Night Live into what it became? No, let's talk about whether I was nice enough in rehearsal 40 years ago. Alyssa Farah Griffin tried to calm things down. I think we can acknowledge both things, right? You've made incredible contributions to comedy, and maybe there were also moments where things could have been handled differently. Both things can be true, but that's not what this is about, is it? Chevy said, looking directly at Joy. This is about you wanting me to gravel. This is about you wanting a moment where Chevy Chase admits he was wrong. He was terrible. He's sorry. He's learned. He's grown. Whatever the script is that everyone expects now, and I'm telling you, that's not happening. Joy leaned forward even more, her voice steady but intense. I don't want you to gravel, Chevy. I want you to be honest. Can you sit there and honestly tell me you have no regrets about how you've treated people throughout your career? The silence that followed felt like it lasted an eternity. Chevy stared at Joy for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but cutting. Of course, I have regrets. Everyone has regrets. But my regrets are mine. They're personal, and they're none of your business. What I'm not going to do is perform contrition for you and this audience like some kind of trained seal, because you've decided that's what I owe you. I don't owe you anything. You're deflecting, Joy said immediately. This is exactly what people talk about when they say you're difficult. You can't just have a straightforward conversation. Everything becomes an attack. Everything becomes defensive. I'm defensive because I'm being attacked, Chevy said, his voice rising. Now, you brought me on this show under the pretense of discussing my book, my career, my life, and comedy. And within minutes, you turned it into an interrogation about my character. How exactly did you expect me to react? Should I be thanking you? Whoopi tried again to redirect. Okay, let's take a breath here. Chevy, your book does talk about some conflicts you've had. Can we focus on what you wrote about SNL and your time there? You've said that period was both the best and worst time of your life. Can you expand on that? I can, but I don't think Joy wants to hear it, Chevy said. Still looking at Joy. I think Joy has already made up her mind about who I am based on articles she's read and stories she's heard secondhand. Why would my actual perspective matter at this point? Your perspective does matter, Joy insisted. That's why I'm asking these questions. But you're acting like any criticism or any question about your past is some kind of personal vendetta. It's not. It's journalism. It's having a real conversation instead of just lobbing softball questions and pretending everything is wonderful. Journalism. Chevy laughed bitterly. Is that what we're calling this? Because it feels a lot more like a hit piece disguised as an interview. And you know what the funny thing is? I actually respect you, Joy. I think you're smart. I think you're quick. I think you don't take garbage from anyone, but right now you're doing exactly what you accuse me of doing. You're being cruel and calling it honesty. The audience was completely silent now, the tension in the studio palpable. Sarah N. looked uncomfortable, glancing between Chevy and Joy like she was watching a car crash in slow motion. Joy's expression hardened. I'm not being cruel. I'm being direct. And if you can't handle direct questions about your own history, maybe you shouldn't be promoting a memoir that discusses that history. You can't write about your life and then get upset when people want to talk about what you wrote. I'm not upset about talking about what I wrote, Chevy said through gritted teeth. I'm upset about your tone, your approach, and your clear agenda coming into this. You didn't read my book wanting to understand me. You read it looking for ammunition. There's a difference. Sonny jumped in. Chevy, I've read your book, and I actually found a lot of it really thoughtful. You talk about your childhood, your struggles, your complicated relationship with your father, but you also gloss over a lot of the professional conflicts pretty quickly. Why do you think that is? Chevy turned to Sonny, seeming slightly calmer when addressing her instead of Joy. Because those conflicts are complicated, and they involve other people who have their own versions of events. I'm not going to write 3 chapters about an argument I had with someone on set 30 years ago when I barely remember the details, and they would probably tell the story completely differently. That's not glossing over. That's being responsible. But that's the problem, Joy interjected. You remember enough to know conflicts happened, but not enough to take any responsibility for them. That's convenient. You know what, Joy? Chevy's voice went cold. I've been in this business long enough to know what you're doing. You're trying to get a viral moment. You're trying to get me to lose my temper. So, you can clip this and put it online and everyone can talk about how terrible Chevy Chase is. And the sad thing is, I'm probably giving you exactly what you want right now. If that's what you think this is about, you're more paranoid than I thought. Joy said, I'm asking you legitimate questions that any interviewer would ask. The fact that you're this bothered by them says more about you than it does about me. I'm bothered because you're being disrespectful. Chevy said, there's a way to ask hard questions with some dignity and grace. And then there's this. You're not Barbara Walters, Joy. You're not even trying to understand where I'm coming from. You just want to score points. Don't tell me what kind of interviewer I am. Joy snapped. I've been doing this for decades, just like you've been doing comedy for decades. And in those decades, I've interviewed hundreds of people, some of whom I've disagreed with strongly, and I've managed to do it without being called disrespectful. Maybe the problem isn't how I'm asking the questions. Maybe it's that you don't like the questions themselves. Alyssa tried to mediate. I think maybe we're all getting a little heated here. Can we just take a step back? Chevy, what do you want people to take away from your book? What's the main message you're hoping readers get? Chevy didn't look at Alyssa. He kept his eyes on Joy. You really think you're the hero in this scenario, don't you? You think you're holding the powerful accountable or whatever, but what you're actually doing is participating in the same kind of cruelty you claim to be against. You're just doing it with a smile and calling it an interview. That's absurd, Joy said. I've been nothing but professional with you. If you can't handle a tough interview, that's your problem, not mine. Professional, Chevy repeated. You ambushed me on live television with accusations framed as questions, and you're calling that professional. If I did this to you, if I invited you somewhere and then spent the entire time attacking your character based on things other people have said, you'd call me every name in the book. But because you're doing it with a panel around you and an audience watching, somehow it's acceptable. Whoopi raised her hands. Okay, gentlemen, ladies, everyone, I think we need to move on to another topic. Chevy, let's talk about your new projects. What are you working on next? But Chevy wasn't done. No, Whoopi. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm not going to just move on like this didn't happen. Joy asked me if I have regrets, and I do. I regret coming on this show today. I regret thinking this would be a genuine conversation, and I regret not walking out the minute this started. The audience gasped again. Joy's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly. Well, the door's right there if you want to leave. Nobody's forcing you to stay. Is that what you want? Chevy asked. You want me to walk out so you can spend the rest of the show talking about how you were right about me all along, because that seems like exactly the kind of thing you'd enjoyed. I want you to either engage in this conversation honestly or admit that you can't. Joy said, those are your options. What I don't want is this victim routine where you act like you're being persecuted for being asked basic questions about your public history. Victim routine, Chevy said, his jaw clenched. That's rich coming from someone who makes a living complaining about everything and everyone on national television. Do you ever look in the mirror and wonder if maybe, just maybe, you're part of the problem you claim to be fighting against? Excuse me? Joy's voice went up an octave. I am not the one with a reputation for making sets toxic. I am not the one multiple colleagues have spoken out about. Don't you dare try to turn this around on me. I'm not turning anything around. Chevy said, I'm pointing out the hypocrisy of someone who built a career on being acerbic and confrontational, lecturing me about being difficult. You want to talk about toxic? Let's talk about ambush interviews. Let's talk about building entire segments around tearing people down. Let's talk about the culture you've contributed to where nobody can have a human moment or make a mistake without being crucified for it. Sunny tried to interject. I think we're losing sight of the actual issues here. No, Sunny. I think we're finally seeing the actual issue, Chevy said, turning to her briefly before looking back at Joy. The issue is that people like Joy have created this environment where the only acceptable response to any criticism is immediate total capitulation. Apologize. Gravel promised to do better. And maybe you'll be forgiven until the next time someone decides to drag you. And I'm not going to participate in that anymore. I'm not going to sit here and let you dissect my entire life and career like I'm some kind of specimen in a lab while you pretend it's all in the name of truth and accountability. Joy leaned back in her chair, a tight smile on her face. You know what I find fascinating, Chevy? You came on this show to promote your book. A book where you talk about your life, and now you're angry that we want to discuss your life. Do you see the contradiction there? Or is self-awareness not really your strong suit? That was the line that did it. Chevy's face went red. Self-awareness. You want to talk about self-awareness? You sit at this table every single day. You interrupt people. You shout over them. You mock them when they disagree with you. And you think that's enlightened discourse. You think that's brave. But it's not brave to attack someone when you've got backup and an audience cheering you on. That's easy. What's brave is admitting when you're wrong. And I haven't heard you admit that once in this entire conversation. I'm not wrong, Joy said firmly. I asked you legitimate questions about documented incidents involving your behavior. If those questions make you uncomfortable, that's something you need to deal with, not blame on me. Documented incidents? Chevy scoffed. You mean gossip? You mean stories from people who had their own axes to grind, their own careers to promote, their own narratives to sell, and you're treating all of that like it's gospel truth because it fits the story you want to tell about me. You decided who I was before I even walked through that door. Whoopi put her hand on the table. Chevy, I really think we should move forward. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about comedy today. About what you think about the current landscape. But Joy wasn't backing down. No, Whoopi. He brought up an interesting point. He thinks I decided who he was before he got here. But Chevy, you've spent this entire interview proving every single thing that's been said about you. You've been defensive. You've been hostile. You've attacked me personally multiple times. And you haven't once genuinely answered a question. So, if I had any preconceptions about you, you've done nothing but confirm them. Chevy stood up. The movement was sudden enough that Sarah N. actually flinched. The audience went completely silent, a hush falling over the studio that felt almost unnatural. You know what, Joy? You're right about one thing. I am proving something here today. I'm proving that I don't have to sit here and take this. I don't have to smile and nod while you insult me to my face and call it an interview. And I don't have to give you the satisfaction of watching me break down and apologize for things I either didn't do or don't remember. The way you want me to remember them. Sit down, Chevy, Joyce said. But there was something in her voice now, a hint of uncertainty. We're in the middle of a show. Then finish the show without me, Chevy said. He started removing his microphone, his hands shaking slightly, whether from anger or adrenaline. I'm sure you'll have plenty to say once I'm gone. You can spend the rest of the segment talking about what a terrible person I am, how I couldn't handle the heat, how this is exactly what everyone said would happen. Go ahead, I'm giving you permission. Whoopi stood up too, Chevy. Please, let's just take a breath. We can talk about this during the commercial break. There's nothing to talk about, Whoopi, Chevy said, and his voice was calmer now, which somehow made it more intense. I came here thinking this was going to be a conversation. I thought I was going to talk about my work, my life, maybe make some people laugh. Instead, I got ambushed by someone who clearly has issues with me that have nothing to do with anything I've actually done to her personally, and I'm not going to reward that behavior by staying. Joy stood up now, too. You are unbelievable. You can't even handle one tough interview. This is exactly the problem. You want everyone to treat you like you're some kind of comedy god who's above criticism. But the second someone pushes back even a little bit, you fall apart. I'm not falling apart, CHVY said, finally getting his microphone off and setting it on the table. I'm making a choice. I'm choosing not to engage with someone who isn't interested in a real conversation. You wanted a fight, Joy. You wanted drama. Well, congratulations. You got it. I hope it was worth it. Oh, don't play the martyr. Joy shot back. You're walking off because you can't defend yourself. Because when someone actually asks you to account for your behavior, you have nothing to say except attacks and affections. Chevy paused, looking at Joy with something that might have been pity. You really believe that, don't you? You really think you're the reasonable one here? That's the saddest part of all of this. You've convinced yourself that cruelty is the same as honesty, that attacking people is the same as holding them accountable. And the worst part is people buy it. They watch shows like this, and they think this is what discourse looks like. This is what conversation looks like. But it's not. It's just people screaming at each other for ratings. Sunny spoke up, her voice measured. Chevy, I don't think anyone here is trying to be cruel. I think we're all just trying to have an honest discussion about complex topics. Can't we find some middle ground? Chevy looked at Sunny and his expression softened just slightly. Sunny, I appreciate that you've tried to be fair throughout this, but there is no middle ground here. Joy doesn't want middle ground. She wants capitulation, and I'm too old and too tired to play that game anymore. This is ridiculous, Joyce said, throwing her hands up. You're walking off a show because you got asked some hard questions. Do you know how many people would kill for this platform? Do you know how privileged you are to even be sitting here and you're throwing a tantrum like a child? Call it whatever you want, Chevy said, starting to walk toward the edge of the set. Call it a tantrum, call it unprofessional, call it proof that everyone was right about me all along. I genuinely don't care anymore. What I care about is not spending another second being disrespected on national television by someone who thinks she's entitled to treat people however she wants as long as she does it with a smile. Alyssa finally spoke up, her voice almost pleading. Chevy, please don't leave like this. I think we can still salvage this conversation. Can we start over? Can we reset and try again? Chevy stopped and turned back to look at the panel. For a moment, it seemed like he might actually be considering it. The audience held its breath. Even Joy seemed to be waiting to see what he would do. You know what the really sad thing is? Chevy said quietly. I actually had things I wanted to say today. I had stories I wanted to share. I had perspectives on comedy and creativity and what it means to try to make people laugh in a world that's increasingly hostile to that. But none of that matters now, does it? All anyone's going to remember from this is that Chevy Chase walked off the view. All anyone's going to talk about is this moment right here. And Joy, you knew that. You knew that from the second you asked that first question. You knew exactly what you were doing. Joy crossed her arms. What I was doing was my job. If you can't handle that, maybe you should stick to Twitter, where you can control the narrative and block anyone who disagrees with you. I don't have Twitter, Chevy said with a bitter laugh. But thank you for proving my point one more time. Even now, even as I'm literally walking away, you can't help yourself. You have to get one more jab in. You have to make sure everyone knows that you won, that you broke me, that you were right all along. Well, enjoy your victory. Joy, I hope it keeps you warm at night. Whoopi made one last attempt. Chevy, as someone who's known you for years, I'm asking you, please sit back down. We can work through this. Chevy looked at Whoopi, and there was genuine regret in his eyes. Whoopi, you're a class act. You always have been. But I can't do this. I can't sit at a table with someone who fundamentally doesn't respect me and pretend like everything's okay. I've spent too much of my life doing that and I'm done. I'm really truly done. And with that, Chevy Chase walked off the set of The View. The cameras followed him as he disappeared into the wings. The audience sitting in stunned silence. Joy sat back down, shaking her head. Sunny and Sarah looked at each other, clearly unsure what to say. Alyssa stared at her notes. Whoopi took a deep breath and turned to the camera. Well, Whoopi said, her voice steady despite the chaos that happened. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue our discussion. Stay with us. As the show cut to commercial, Joy leaned back in her chair, and though the cameras were off, her expression was unreadable. The other hosts began talking quietly among themselves. But Joy remained silent, staring at the empty seat where Chevy Chase had been sitting just moments before. So there you have it. One of the most explosive interviews in recent talk show history. A moment where two strong personalities collided and neither one was willing to back down. Was Joy out of line with her questions, or was Chevy unable to handle legitimate criticism? Should he have stayed and tried to work through the conflict, or was walking off the only way to maintain his dignity? Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Who is in the wrong here? And make sure to subscribe because we break down moments like this all the time. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.